بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. I remind you to have a sincere intention in your heart when attending the lesson, seeking reward from Allah Ta'ala. Inshallah, in our lesson today, we will be talking about an important matter as usual. And our topic today is about the congregational prayer. And we had already started mentioning this topic in our previous lessons. Now, inshallah, we will talk about following the Imam in the Jumu'ah prayer. Now, there are lots of details in this regard. We will not go into depth. Okay, so inshallah, in our lesson today, we will speak in general terms without going into many details about this topic. But before we start, I want you to be aware of these terms that we will be using in our lesson today, inshallah. And you know that we mentioned praying in congregation is more rewardable. So when the person has the opportunity to pray in congregation, let one do that because there is more reward when one prays the 5 obligatory prayers in congregation, Jama'ah. Now, when we say Imam, when it comes to following the Imam, Imam is the one who is leading the prayer. And Ma'mum means the follower, the person following the Imam in the prayer. So one is the Imam and the other one is the Ma'mum. The Imam is the leader in the prayer and the Ma'mum is the one following the Imam in the prayer. When you have males and females praying together, the Imam needs to be a male, cannot be a female. A female does not lead a man in the prayer, okay? If all the ones praying are females, then of course a female can lead the prayer in this case. So the female can be the Imam in the prayer when everyone who is praying with her are females. However, if there are males, then the Imam would need to be a male. Now we are talking about the case when the Imam is a male, and we're talking about the Ma'mum, the followers, following the Imam in this prayer. So it is an obligation on the follower in the prayer, whether this prayer is Jumu'ah or otherwise, not to precede the Imam in the standing position or the opening statement, Allahu Akbar. Let's start by talking about the standing position. So the Ma'mum, the follower, is not to precede the Imam in the standing position, okay? That's one thing. And also the follower, the Ma'mum, is not to precede the Imam in the opening statement. When we say the opening statement, we're talking about Takbirat al-Ihram. This is how it is referred to in Arabic, Takbirat al-Ihram. When the person who is praying starts the prayer, he starts by saying, Allahu Akbar. So this is the opening statement. So the Ma'mum, the follower, is not to precede the Imam in saying the opening statement. It would not be valid to pray in congregation like that if he precedes his Imam in saying the opening statement. So he has to wait until the Imam has completely finished saying Allahu Akbar. Then the follower starts saying Allahu Akbar, starts his entering the prayer by saying Allahu Akbar. So first the Imam completely finishes saying the opening statement, then the Ma'mum would say it. So it is an obligation on the follower in the prayer, whether Jumu'ah or otherwise, not to precede the Imam in the standing position or the opening statement, Allahu Akbar. In fact, simultaneity with the Imam in the opening statement, Allahu Akbar, invalidates the follower's prayer. However, simultaneity with the Imam in other than the opening statement, Allahu Akbar, is disliked with the exception of saying Ameen. So that means the follower, as we said, is to wait until the Imam has completely finished saying the opening statement, Allahu Akbar, and then the follower would say it. Okay? And simultaneity in other than the opening statement is disliked, with the exception of saying Ameen. Notice when the person is praying in congregation, one is doing that to earn the reward. So you don't want to do anything that is disliked. So you would not then in the other integrals do them simultaneously with the Imam. You would wait with the physical integrals we're talking here. You would wait until the Imam finishes doing the physical integral, then you would do it. Okay? And as we said, the exception here is Ameen. In fact, saying Ameen together with the Imam, it is Sunnah. So this is the exception. Saying Ameen here together with the Imam, this is allowed. In fact, it is Sunnah. And Ameen is an Arabic term, by the way. It means we're asking Allah to accept, okay? It is not part of the Fatiha. So the Imam recites Al-Fatiha and says Ameen. It is Sunnah for the Ma'mum to say Ameen at the same time with the Imam after finishing Al-Fatiha, okay? So saying Ameen, the term Ameen, is not part of Al-Fatiha. Now, it says, although this does not invalidate the follower's prayer, they are prohibited from outpacing the Imam by one physical integral. Remember, the prayer has verbal integrals and physical integrals. I will give an example of each. Verbal integral is like reciting Al-Fatiha. Al-Fatiha is an integral of the prayer. It needs to be done for the prayer to be valid. This is a verbal integral. A physical integral is like a ruku'. This is a physical integral. It is part of the prayer, okay? So even though it does not invalidate the follower's prayer, but the follower is not to outpace the Imam by one physical integral. This is not allowed. You don't go ahead of your Imam. So when you are following in the prayer, you do not go ahead of your Imam. One's prayer is invalidated, however, if one outpaces or lags behind the Imam by two consecutive long physical integrals, or one long and one short physical integral without a valid excuse. So in this case, then, the prayer of the ma'mum is invalidated if they do that without having a valid excuse. Now, one might ask, what is here like a valid excuse? The scholars mentioned like if the follower recites Al-Fatiha slowly, okay? This is an example that they give. And lagging behind the Imam by more than 3 long physical integrals invalidates the follower's prayer, even if the follower had an excuse for that. In this case, if they lag by more than 3 long physical integrals, in this case, the prayer of the follower would be invalid, even if the follower had an excuse. So you might think, okay, but if he is slow at reciting Al-Fatiha, what does he do in this case, the follower? We will mention that, inshallah. So if the follower stays behind to finish reciting Al-Fatiha, after the Imam completes bowing, ruku', and 2 prostrations, and sits for the tashahhud, if this is, for example, the last rak'ah, or stands up to start another rak'ah, then the follower must be in unison with the Imam, and then performs 1 cycle, 1 rak'ah, after the closing salam of the Imam. If the follower completes the recitation of Al-Fatiha before this, that means before the Imam precedes them by more than 3 long physical integrals, they continue in the order of their own prayer. So if the follower stays behind to finish reciting Al-Fatiha after the Imam completes bowing and the 2 prostrations, that means 3 long integrals, physical integrals. So if the follower stays behind to finish reciting Al-Fatiha after the Imam completes bowing and the 2 prostrations and sits for the tashahhud or stands up, we're talking about the Imam sits for the tashahhud or stands up, then the follower must be in unison with the Imam. So what does he do? He does not continue reciting. He stops what he is reciting and immediately follows the Imam in what he is doing. And after the Imam says the closing salam, what does the ma'mum, the follower, need to do here? The follower then does one cycle. But in order to continue his prayer with the Imam, he leaves reciting Al-Fatiha and follows his Imam right away. And then when the Imam says the closing salam, then the ma'mum, the follower, would do one more cycle, okay? Now, if the follower completes, however, the recitation of Al-Fatiha before this, meaning before the Imam precedes the follower by more than 3 long physical integrals, in this case, the follower can continue in the order that he is following, okay? Because in this case, he did not lag behind by more than 3 long physical integrals. He had already completed finishing reciting Al-Fatiha and he was going down for ruku'. All right, the next thing is that the follower must know the movements of the Imam. The follower must know the movements of the Imam. The scholars say either by him actually physically seeing the Imam, or the follower is seeing another follower in front of him who is seeing the Imam, or the follower is hearing the Imam, or hearing the person who is conveying from the Imam. In big mosques, big masjids, you know, there are some mosques that are very big, mashallah, and there are lots of people in them sometimes. So sometimes you would have another person, not the Imam, another person who would repeat after the Imam, so the followers know the movements of the Imam. For example, the Imam says, Allahu Akbar. This person who is conveying, he would repeat and say, Allahu Akbar. So the followers who were not able to hear the Imam, they would be hearing this conveyor, okay? So this would be then valid if the person was hearing the conveyor's voice. Also, the follower must be with their Imam in a mosque, so they are praying together in a masjid, or else, meaning if they are not praying together in a mosque, then within 300 cubits. This is if they are not praying together in a mosque, then there needs to be not more than 300 cubits distance between the Imam and the follower. If they are both praying in a mosque, in a masjid, then it does, even if the distance between them is more than 300 cubits. But if they are praying outside a mosque, then the distance between them should not be more than 300 cubits. However, if there were many lines of followers in between, you know how sometimes when they're praying, for example, the Friday prayer, and the mosque is full, and they might be lines outside the masjid of followers praying, so that you'd have a line and another line and another line. In this case, for the distance not to be more than 300 cubits between him, the follower, and the row before him, even if the distance between this follower and the Imam is more than 300 cubits, but it's not more than 300 cubits between the follower and the row of followers before him, okay? And another matter that one needs to pay attention to when praying in congregation is that there should not be a barrier between the follower and the imam that prevents the follower from reaching the imam, such as a wall. Okay, so one should be careful of that, because this is considered a barrier that prevents the follower from reaching the imam if there was a wall. Also, the prayer format of both, meaning the follower and the imam, must agree. We're talking about the prayer format. So this means then it is invalid for the performer of the daily obligatory prayer to pray behind, meaning to follow a person who is praying the funeral prayer. I will repeat that. It is not valid for a person who is performing one of the obligatory prayers, for example, Subh, Dhuhr, Asr, Al-Maghrib, or Al-Isha, for him to follow an imam who is performing the funeral prayer. This is not valid. Why not? Because the format of the prayer of the two is not the same. Inshallah ta'ala, in our next lesson, we will be talking about the funeral prayer and other matters related to that topic as well, inshallah. And you will notice that the funeral prayer does not include ruku' nor sujood. So it's done while standing. They do not perform ruku' or sujood in the funeral prayer. Okay, for those of you who prayed the funeral prayer would know this. So therefore, a person who is praying one of the 5 obligatory prayers would not follow an imam who is performing the funeral prayer, because the funeral prayer, the format of the funeral prayer is not the same as the format of the person performing any of the 5 obligatory prayers. The funeral prayer does not have any ruku' or sujood, whereas when we are performing the obligatory prayers, any of the 5 obligatory prayers, you know there is ruku' and sujood, okay? Also, both the imam and the follower must not disagree enormously with each other in a recommended act, whether by doing it or leaving it out. Like what? Like sitting for the first tashahhud. If you remember when we spoke about the integrals of the prayer, we said among the integrals of the prayer is to sit for the last tashahhud. So if we are talking about a prayer that has 4 cycles, 4 rak'ah, such as what? Such as Dhuhr prayer, for example, it has 4 rak'ah. It is sunnah, meaning recommended, to sit for the first tashahhud, meaning after prostrating the second time in the second cycle, second rak'ah, it is sunnah to sit and say the first tashahhud. But if the person does not sit for the first tashahhud and stands up to start the third rak'ah, it is valid, because the integral is to sit for the last tashahhud, the last one, the last cycle. So the one in the second cycle of a prayer that has 4 cycles, the first tashahhud is sunnah, okay? So then, both the imam and the follower must not disagree enormously with each other in a recommended act, whether by doing it or leaving it out, like sitting for the first tashahhud. So in case the imam leaves out the first tashahhud, even though it is sunnah to do it, okay, we said it is the first tashahhud is not an integral, but it is sunnah to do it. But let's say, for example, the imam leaves it out, then the follower does not do it. He is not to do it, because otherwise he would be disagreeing with his imam in a matter that is considered an enormous disagreement. Okay, so if the imam does not sit for the first tashahhud, the ma'moom, the follower, does not sit either. Okay, he also stands to start the third cycle following his imam. All right, even though it is sunnah. Usually the imam prays does the first tashahhud. But we're saying in case, we're giving an example of a matter in this case, okay? Also, the follower must intend to follow the Imam while saying the opening statement, Allahu Akbar, in the Jumu'ah prayer. Remember when we spoke about the Jumu'ah prayer, we said it is prayed in congregation. The Friday prayer, Al-Jumu'ah, is not prayed individually. It is prayed in congregation. So the follower must intend in one's heart to follow the Imam while saying the opening statement, Allahu Akbar. Isn't this when one establishes the intention? Remember, one establishes the intention in one's heart when one says at the same time, Allahu Akbar, the opening statement, Allahu Akbar, with one's tongue. At the same time, one establishes the intention in one's heart. So if the person is praying the Friday prayer and he is following the Imam, then he has to have in his heart the intention that he is following the Imam in the prayer. Okay, because the Friday prayer is prayed in congregation. In other than the Friday prayer, this intention must occur before following the Imam in his moves after a long wait for the Imam to move. It is an obligation upon the Imam now. Now, first we spoke about the follower when he has to have this intention, okay? It is an obligation upon the Imam, however, now to have the intention that he is leading the prayer in Al-Jumu'ah prayer and also in the repeated prayer, which is referred to as Al-Mu'adah. So now we move on to talk about the Imam. When does the Imam have to have the intention in his heart that he is leading the prayer? Since he is the Imam, so he's leading the prayer. When does he have to do that? If he is leading the Friday prayer, Al-Jumu'ah prayer, he needs to have in his heart the intention while saying Allahu Akbar. In his heart, he has the intention that he is leading the prayer. And where else? Also in the Mu'adah prayer, the repeated prayer. This prayer, Al-Mu'adah, refers to a prayer that one prayed before but is repeating. For example, one prayed it individually before, and then this person found other people to pray it in congregation with. So one wants more reward, so he repeats it to gain more reward. In this case, the one who is leading this prayer, Al-Mu'adah, would have the intention in his heart that he is leading it. Now, however, it is recommended in other prayers because they're praying in congregation. So in other than the Friday prayer, and in other than the repeated prayer, Al-Mu'adah, it is recommended for the leader, meaning the Imam, to have this intention because he wants to pray in congregation and he is to pray in congregation and for the reward of congregation. Okay. Inshallah ta'ala, we will end by giving some examples of when it is considered that the follower completed the cycle with his Imam and when it is not. And if he did not complete the cycle with his Imam, then he would do another cycle after the Imam says the closing salam. So I want to give some examples to clarify this to you. There are sometimes cases where the Imam has started the prayer, okay? And there are already people praying behind this Imam. And for example, you enter the mosque and you see that they are praying, so you want to follow. You want to follow this Imam. But this Imam has already started the prayer, but you want to follow to gain the reward of the Jama'ah. Definitely do that. Now, when is it considered that you have completed the cycle with the Imam or not? Let's say if the Imam had already started the prayer. So he started by saying Allahu Akbar. Then he recites Al-Fatiha, right? Then he bows to make ruku'. If in this case, the follower starts the prayer, says Allahu Akbar, and the Imam is doing what? The Imam is in the ruku' position. In this case, what is the follower to do? He says Allahu Akbar, he entered the prayer. What is this Imam, what is the follower to do right away in this case now after saying Allahu Akbar? To bow with the Imam. To bow with the Imam, okay? So he bows with the Imam. He said Allahu Akbar and he bowed. If he bowed, he reached this ruku' position and the Imam was still in the ruku' position, then this cycle is counted for the follower. Okay, I will repeat it. If the Imam had started the prayer and went down for ruku', and while the Imam is in ruku' position, the follower, the ma'mum, started the prayer by saying Allahu Akbar, and then right away went to ruku' and reached ruku' position while the Imam is still in the ruku' position. This means the follower has reached him in this cycle. So he follows as usual, he follows as normal. Let us say the Imam bowed. And then what is he going to do? He's going to straighten up, right? Straighten up, tuma'nina, and then go down for sujood, right? So let's say the Imam already recited Al-Fatiha, bowed, and then straightened up. And now the follower came and he wants to follow this congregational prayer. So the follower entered the prayer, said Allahu Akbar. And when did he start here? When the Imam had already straightened up from ruku'. In this case, at the end, when the Imam finishes and says the closing salam, says Assalamu alaikum, he finishes the prayer. In this case, the ma'mum, the follower, does not say Assalamu alaikum and finish. No, because he has now one more cycle to do. And that is the first one in which he did not reach the Imam in it in the bowing position. So if he started after the Imam was done with the bowing position and had straightened up, then the follower who joined after the Imam was done would need to do one more cycle after the Imam completes the prayer and says Assalamu alaikum. Okay, is it clear? Because some people don't pay attention to this matter. And then they say Assalamu alaikum right after the Imam, when in fact they still have one more rak'ah to do. Now, of course, there are a lot more examples to say in this case. What if he joins and the Imam was already in the second rak'ah or in the third rak'ah? Inshallah ta'ala, later on we can talk more and give more examples. And Allah ta'ala knows best.